Today, I'm delighted to be joined by one of Australia's best divers. He's competed at Olympics, Commonwealth Games, and he's on track to do the same in Tokyo this year at the rescheduled Olympics. Thank you for joining me today, James Conner.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
There's so much that I do want to get in with you today, but we have to go back to the start. Tell me a little bit about your childhood and how much of a role did sport play in growing up in Australia?
Massive, I suppose, and it's probably the answer you get from every Australian Olympian that you'll be speaking to. Sport was a huge part of my, I suppose, upbringing. I was the kind of kid that was trying everything. I remember being super proud in about grade 4, grade 3, or whatever thereabouts. I had a different sport on after school every day. You know, one day was baseball training, the other day was tennis training, the other day was swimming, the other day was diving here and there, and and of course AFL was in there as well. So for me, it was a bit of I just tried my hand at everything, and really, I suppose, fell in love with diving and football. AFL football and diving were my two big passions, I suppose, as a kid. That kind of aligned with this overarching goal that I had, either to play AFL footy or to go to the Olympics. And I suppose at the time I wasn't 6 foot. At the time I was making these decisions, it just seemed that diving was going to be my best bet. And I, as I progressed through the ranks in that, all those other sports that I enjoyed doing, or just little passion projects, I suppose, would just fell by the wayside for extra diving training sessions. And then football was the last to go. But I suppose I haven't looked back since.
Talk to me a little bit about the football side of things. What position were you playing? Who were you growing up supporting, looking up to?
Yeah, no, I was a lifelong Essendon Bombers supporter. So it's been some tough times, obviously, over recent years. But optimistic that might turn around soon. But for me personally, I played a little bit sort of in the middle. Like I said, I was a pretty small guy. And so I wasn't very, I wasn't sort of too tall to be playing up forward or anything like that. So I was basically just running around in the middle. And hoping to run out games. But more than anything, I just enjoyed being part of the team. We had a lot of team success as the under 11s, under 12s. They're probably the highlight of my football career for sure. And I'm kind of glad I probably didn't give myself a chance to sabotage that by continuing to go with it.
So James, you kind of mentioned how all Australian Olympians, everyone who gets involved in sport, has a really sporty childhood. They're getting involved in a lot of things, but especially when it comes to something like diving, everyone is involved in the water, whether it's the beach, whether it's a bit of swimming. At what point did it go from, okay, I really like diving, jumping in the water and swimming, that sort of stuff, to hang on a sec, I could maybe take this professional?
I was probably, so I started diving when I was 8 years old. And at that time it was certainly, like I said, it was basically just the once a week kind of get your feet wet and see if you can try a front flip. Yeah. It was better doing it in the water than it was out the back, in the backyard tramp with my sister just throwing me in the air. So it was probably a bit of, just, looking out for myself to sort of get me into the diving from that side of things. And it probably was around about, I think I was probably, 11 or 12, probably about 11 actually, where all of a sudden these kind of talent pathways, I suppose, were sort of being sort of, I suppose, created in Victoria. I'd had a bit of success in the sort of lower rungs of kind of novice competitions and moving into sort of some age kind of recreational type stuff. But there was a few sort of taps on the shoulder and sort of talk about, hey, like there's groups starting up, maybe you should look at sort of, I suppose, trialing for it and that sort of stuff. And honestly, it was kind of just through successful sort of progression in that way that sort of opened my eyes to the fact that maybe this is something that, I could progress in and could achieve highly in. But it was certainly from others, I think, sort of making that assessment of me earlier before I myself sort of either truly understood it or believed it or what have you. But I think it's part of that was sort of just trusting in the process. And I had great coaches and great training partners all through the way, all along the way. And so I think in a way that sort of decision to go professional, that decision to sort of do it to the best of my ability, almost kind of just happened without me really realizing that that's kind of the level that I'd gotten to. And that was sort of where we were heading. And then it was just, I suppose that was where the hard work really started, when I probably woke up to myself and realized, all right, we got to keep moving with this.
What does the step up in diving involve? You kind of mentioned how like just on the trampoline or being thrown into the pool, but when you go, all right, I'm going to take this seriously. When you're a kid, what does training start? When does training start? How many hours a week are you doing to try and go, okay, I want to be a professional diver?
Yeah, well, like I said, so initially it was all just one session a week, a couple of hours, and then you add on another session like that. But when you really get into the sort of, I suppose the 10 sessions a week type training schedule, which is what sort of hit me with the talent sort of programs that we started sort of going into. That was when you're all of a sudden training before school, usually about 6 o'clock till 8 o'clock. You're getting in the car, you're going straight off to primary school for a 9 o'clock start. I was living out in Glen Waverley training, which was about sort of a 30, 40-minute drive from Melbourne City where I was training at the time. So it was basically a loving mother, I suppose, that was doing the shuttling back and forth, which really sort of made it possible. But it was basically the before school, then you're at school full day, then you go straight back to training for about, it was about sort of 3:30 to about 6 o'clock or thereabouts. So it was pretty much just sort of from a young age, I suppose. The swimmers do their real crazy hours with the really early rise, but for us, it was certainly early enough, if you ask me. But about that 10 sessions a week from, about the age of probably 10, 11 was really sort of when we got moving, I think. And like I said, really sort of tracking towards sort of bigger and better things with respect to sort of competitions and opportunities and that sort of stuff.
How was school as a result? Were you kind of like struggling some days to stay awake, especially for those early morning starts?
I think that was probably something that, I had plenty of time to get used to that, obviously, as I continued to dive well through my academic sort of career, or at least so far through school and that sort of thing. But I think for me, it was just about, at school, both of my family had education is just highly valued in my family, and they're all sort of super hard workers, both in the classroom and out of it in all their respective domains. So for me, it was kind of just a matter of, it was just about balancing, I suppose, priorities at the time. If there was a diving competition, or exactly if I was a really early session or whatever, and I was falling asleep in class, that just meant that I was going to have to do extra homework, I suppose, at night to sort of make that up, because success in both realms was super important to me. And it was something that was something I maintained kind of throughout sort of the rest of, through high school, through university, and I suppose now, hopefully, into my professional career as that awaits me sort of on the other side of my diving career.
Now, look, I've tried to do as much research on you as possible. Looking at your Wikipedia page, it could do with a bit of updating, let's put it that way. There's not much there beyond sort of 2012, but it's still pretty good that it goes back that far, I kind of think. And according to that, there was your first sort of big competition that you did well in was the British Elite Junior Championships in 2009. Is that correct?
Wow, yeah, that certainly is dialing back the clocks, that's for sure. That was my first, I suppose, junior competition. So really my first international competition representing Australia, I suppose. But even then, it was still sort of within the junior ranks. So it was a different kind of style of competition to what we do as a senior. But that probably was my, in some respects, I sort of coming of age to sort of actually leave Australia. Diving here isn't sort of an overly populated sport. There isn't a huge amount of participation, but those at the top in our country seem to overachieve when we go internationally. And for me, I think before I had that exposure, you sort of start to wonder, maybe it's just sort of big fish, little pond type situation. But then when you do have that opportunity to sort of go overseas, not only do you have the pride in representing, I suppose, your country in that relative sense at the time anyway, that was a learning experience for me. And then of course that competition actually went really well for me, which was a pleasant surprise as well. But that was sort of what got the ball rolling, I suppose. And then the next year, I was into the open competition. So it was a nice transition, I suppose. And it was pretty quick when I think about it in terms of time and years like that. But I suppose that's how hard we were training, and it just so happened that it kind of transitioned that way. Like I said, good coaches and good teammates.
So I think, look, my maths has never been my strong point, but you would have been about 14 going overseas to compete for Australia. That must be pretty cool at such a young age to have that opportunity.
Yeah, no, it was for sure. And, exactly. That was, pretty sort of eye-opening, like I said. And, you want, it's easy to sort of think like, oh, I'm just, I'm young, it's just experience or whatever. But like I said, those years sort of rolled into the next pretty quickly. And by about 2010, competing at the Commonwealth Games, it was, I think back now, I think I just turned 16 for that event. And so, or maybe it was, I'm trying to think now. You're right, maths as I think on the spot, but I think it was 2010. I would have been just gone 15, I suppose. So competing at the Commonwealth Games. So all of a sudden you go from this situation of being like, I'm young, I'm just new on the scene, and I'm just trying to sort of like get some experience under my belt to sort of work out where I place and that sort of stuff in the international setting, to all of a sudden sink or swim mentality where you're sort of thrown into the deep end and you've got to sort of hold your own against some of the best in the world.
And then I guess the other aspect of that is you started very early on the 10-meter platform. Was there ever any hesitation as a young kid looking up at that 10-meter platform? I know when I've seen diving and stuff, I look at it, go, oh yeah, 1 meter I could do, maybe 3 meter, but I look at the 10 and just go, no, that's not for me. Was there ever any of that fear or hesitation when you were a young kid?
Absolutely, yeah. I think in some respects it was probably a little bit less. I think as you get older, that sort of self-preservation mindset sort of kicks in. You start to realize, hang on a second, I don't quite bounce back after hard sessions anymore, or it takes a bit more of a toll. But as a young kid, for me, 10 meter, yeah, it looks incredibly daunting, both from the pool deck and when you're looking down at the water from all the way up there. But the reason why I sort of, I would say, kind of focused on the 10 meter or persevered with that, or pursued that, was just it was literally just a matter of opportunity. Obviously, as a young kid, like I said, 15 or so, I didn't have the leg strength, I didn't have the upper body strength, I didn't have anything, I suppose, to be able to really bend the springboards enough to be able to do the dives that were going to allow me to compete at the highest level, both domestically in Australia, but also internationally. So when I looked up at the 10 meter, I sort of saw that there was a bit of a 10 meter spot at the time that I was looking to make that jump. The bloke who was in first place was the reigning Olympic champion, Matthew Mitchum. So it was a bit of it was a long climb to ever try and hope to, be anywhere sort of near par with him. But as far as sort of underneath that, there was certainly opportunity. There was a few of us sort of looking at that. And I suppose, like I said, if it wasn't a matter, it was just sort of, I suppose, understanding that the best way forward, or the most realistic way for me to get on an Olympic team for that 2012 games, which was the next one coming, was then to definitely be on 10 meter, where you are sort of capable, I suppose, of, how high you jump, for example, is just a matter of your technique, and it's a matter of 10 meter when you're working with a bit of concrete, whereas obviously there's some more physical advantages to being bigger and stronger when you're trying to bend the board and get a bit of kickback single session. But it was a great opportunity, and one that I sort of grabbed with both hands, and one that I think also has served me really well in the latter years of my career as well, now that I am spending more time down on that springboard, a little bit closer to the water.
So I guess the first big international event that you had was the 2010 Commonwealth Games. Again, you're still a teenager at this stage. I think you finished 9th. What was that like, going to such a big event? I think 2010 was in India, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, in Delhi. And so yeah, it was pretty surreal. Like I said, that was when I had that competition in the UK. That was my first time representing Australia and as a junior. So really leaving Australia to sort of compete as part of a national team, if you will. But that Commonwealth Games was my first senior open competition. And I suppose the Commonwealth for diving, we're missing a lot of the big sort of heavy hitters, whether it's the US or China, Mexico, for example, Russia. But the countries that do compete, it's incredibly sort of, I would say, like, intense competition. Not only the rivalry, but also just great levels of, expertise in all the events. So for me, going to that event was very much like well, now I really don't know where I stack up. I know I'm training hard, and I'm coming in with these sort of dives I've sort of either recently learnt or what have you. But I was a pretty unknown quantity, I suppose, as far as other countries, looking at me. But at the same time, I didn't even know half these guys that I was going to compete against. I just knew they were going to be better than me. So going off to that event was certainly eye-opening. It was a great opportunity to be a part of a village environment, which was amazing for me. I really sort of, I suppose, thrived in that environment. I suppose walking around with just other, whether it's Australian athletes that you recognize or from other sports or what have you, or even just living in close quarters with your national diving team. That was incredible for me. And it was also, I suppose, an important experience then leading into a hopeful Olympic campaign 2 years later, to sort of had that kind of experience in a multi-sport international event like that. So finishing 9th, to be honest, was a bit of a disappointment for me. Once going into there, like I said, I had no real expectations performance-wise and outcome-wise, and I sort of have maintained that sort of outlook moving through competitions sort of since, throughout my entire career. But after the prelim, I don't remember where I stacked up exactly there, but I knew that there were things that I was hoping I was going to be able to improve upon in the final. I knew that there was sort of more to give, I guess. And unfortunately, that sort of didn't eventuate in the way that I had hoped. But looking back on that, like you said, yeah, a 15-year-old kid, and the good that came of that event, whether it was the disappointment and how I then took that back into training as far as the result was concerned, whether it was the experience of I suppose an event of that scale or an international event and that sort of stuff. It was absolutely invaluable. And and it sort of set me up for a long career after that. And I'm super grateful for that opportunity.
Do you have any specific memories of being so young in such a big Australian team? Obviously, Australia sends a massive team to Commonwealth Games. About anyone in particular taking you under your wing and just what it was like being able to experience that sort of event? You touched on kind of the Commonwealth Games village and getting to experience that so young. I guess what differences have you found as you've gone to more international events like that about just how different, I guess, that first one was as a teenager?
Yeah, there was certainly, especially internationally speaking, a lot of the Canadian team, for example, was super welcoming to me. But I would spend a lot of time hanging out with them, I guess, whether it was up on the 10-meter boards themselves or if it was sort of in the village. And so I certainly enjoyed the aspect of, I suppose, really great quality athletes in diving specifically that sort of, made me feel very welcome in that space. And then my diving was what was going to sort of see, like I said, if I was going to be able to stack up and actually compete in that environment. But it was certainly enjoyable. And I think the biggest takeaway, I suppose, change, I guess, that happened between that Commonwealth Games and then even going into the Olympics was a better understanding of, I suppose, how you were going to how you're going to sort of fuel yourself or what sort of foods you're going to eat. Because as a 15-year-old kid, when you're getting there and there's trays of donuts and there's all these different, I suppose, breakfast options, when my breakfast, and even to this day, is just like, a very modest bowl of cereal and, maybe sort of some juice and a coffee or something like that. As a kid, then I'm thinking like, whoa, you got like, there's scrambled eggs and there's bacon and there's everything. So I think just kind of like having that experience certainly then, like I said, set me up for when I then get back into those villages, whether it was the Olympics 2 years later. You're more aware of what to expect. Sort of what temptations are going to be around. Sort of kind of. I guess kind of, really what to expect to allow to then, perform at your best because you've taken those lessons from that experience. And I think it's really hard to kind of, you can be told that this is there or that's going to be the case or this is how you sort of operate getting to and from the pool on buses and that sort of stuff. But until you sort of live it and sort of make those own sort of take those lessons sort of for yourself, it's hard to kind of really implement that to then call on that experience later on.
So the next 2 years for you is leading up to London 2012. Before I get into that specific event, I guess, I just want to touch on what your Olympic memories were as a kid, and was being an Olympic athlete something that you always aspired to be?
It was actually, like I said, I sort of touched on briefly. It was either to play AFL football in the AFL or it was to represent Australia in an Olympics. And to be honest, I was at the time, it was just about being involved, really. Like I was happy to, even if I was there as a coach, later on, or if I was, and at that time, I wasn't even diving. Like there was no pathway to the games that was feasible. It was literally just a goal of mine. And I think that was probably part of I don't remember too much as far as like actually watching the Sydney Games, for example, but I think that home Olympics, I know my dad got on we were talking about it, just last year, because obviously they were having the 20-year anniversary, things, that sort of stuff. And my old man probably, to the disappointment of mum, raising this small, this big family sort of on our own in those 2 weeks. Dad literally just was watching Sydney Games on the TV and just said, I just got to go. I just got like, this is happening, and he said he got on a Greyhound bus pretty much and just got, he didn't have anywhere to stay. He just had to go, so I think, to be honest, I think that's obviously, Kathy Freeman, for example, was incredibly inspiring to me. And there's those, those stories that sort of, just sporting folklore in Australia, with the swimmers as well. Just, I think that sort of built up over that, even as a young kid, just the prestige of the games and sort of what it can do to sort of galvanize an entire country and sort of really puts the highest level of sport, really sport on a pedestal. So for me, there was that goal, but like I said, there was no plan. There was no way of doing it. It was, and then even once I got into diving, like I said, even that I didn't at the time think, well, diving's an Olympic sport. It was really just, really just sort of what happened. And we continued to sort of progress through. And then it wasn't until later on I realized maybe this is possible.
When you found out you qualified for 2012 in London, obviously it would have been from an event, but How did you feel in that moment, knowing that you would be representing Australia in an Olympic Games?
Amazing. I remember the lead up to 2012. I had a long-standing back injury, and so I had a lot of time off, sort of at the end of 2011 through to early 2012, and so it was looking very kind of, very sort of unsure as to whether or not I was even going to be able to dive at the trials to a level that I was optimistically hoping I would be able to. Because then diving well at the trials was going to be the only chance of getting on that team to begin with. So I was still a fair way off. And even I remember the trials for that event were in Adelaide. I was training in the morning. We did a sort of a list run through, so all my dives in the morning, and then I went home back to sort of the motel we were staying at, and I had about an hour and a half to just chill, relax before our prelim started. So essentially, your prelim, semi-final, and final. Your cumulative list was what was going to qualify you for the game. So it was basically kind of the real calm before the storm, I suppose. And I remember having this like moment of clarity, the anxiety sort of building, and I'm sort of getting a bit more, there's a lot of adrenaline, but there's also a lot of nerves, and I'm thinking like, oh, this is what it's all for, and it's about performing right now. And then, I had this like real moment of calm just before I left the door, just before I left the motel, I suppose. And I remember thinking, the Olympics in my mind is an opportunity for the world's best athletes to come together, fight it out in their respective, domains. And then the winner or the top three or the placings are just, are sort of just determined on that day. And so in my mind, I thought, well, if the Olympics are, in my head, reserved for the best of the best, I remember thinking, maybe that's not me yet. Like I've got with my back where it's at, with my training where it's at, that's okay. I sort of had this moment of real calm of being like, with my respect of the games, if I'm not there, in a few months' time, then so I'm going to be okay. I can, I'll be better be better in 4 years' time anyway, and it'll be all right. And I think that sort of, that sort of moment, I think, of clarity really sort of allowed me to sort of drop those nerves and that anxiety and just kind of go out into the pool for that prelim and just kind of like with nothing to lose. And so I actually dove incredibly well in that prelim, in that semi-final, in that final, and just managed to keep the good times rolling. Matt Mitchum was well and truly ahead of me, that's for sure. But I was that second guy. And I just remember being so proud. I remember being so proud of the fact that with all the adversity we had to sort of endure and trying to get back to even full fitness for that trial. But then in a sport like diving, things go wrong so quickly. It's just split-second things that sort of go as the difference between a great dive and a really poor dive. And it was only one poor dive that would take you off that team. So for me, it was just a moment of real sort of contentment, I suppose. But then also it kind of flicked a switch of being like, well, now I have this, in some ways, responsibility to represent my country, to the best I can, to fill the shoes of the best of the best, essentially, in the way that I see the Olympics as being, and kind of earn my stripes a little bit. So it was both kind of this simultaneous, I suppose, feeling of just kind of relief, but then also sort of excitement and motivation and inspiration for the next couple of months that was going to be the difference maker leading into the games.
That moment of calm you're talking about, I find that really interesting. Is that something that you've kind of tried to adopt throughout your career, even when you were younger, that you go, all right, just lower expectations a bit because it'll help me perform better? Is that something that you do to cope with nerves quite often?
No, honestly, and I'd never really done it before either. I think the difference was, like I said, at the time, even at those trials, I think they were sort of in April, so I would have still been 16 at the time. And I think it was more just an understanding of being, this would be nice, but it's not the sort of be all and end all. And while that's still the case, for every competition, for every performance, it's certainly not the be all and end all, sort of label, but it certainly is. At that point, it was kind of like, this would be a nice sort of opportunity if it happens, to then after that being like, okay, now it's sort of not expected of me, but now that's the level that I'm at. And so for me, that then I suppose after that was a matter of, I suppose, embracing that sort of expectation, but then also living up to it as well. And so if anything, it probably, that lowering of expectations allowed me to exceed beyond them, but then it set the bar for things moving forward. And honestly, I talk about this sort of a lot with other sort of athletes, I guess. And I often say that, when you're sort of in that position of nothing to lose, it gives rise to exactly those kind of opportunities and that sort of performances. But then the hardest part is because then you're celebrated and it's like, wow, where have you come from? And how you've improved so much, that sort of stuff. But then you come back to the national championships, or you come back to the trials the next year, and all of a sudden there is that expectation to perform. And that, I think, is the, really the hardest part about getting to the point of being sort of in that sort of upper echelon of athletes, in particular in any country, but in Australia has been my experience. Because then all of a sudden that expectation is sort of put on you, and it's on you to then how you change your training to sort of make sure that you're constantly rising and constantly finding ways to better yourself. And yeah, I guess I was lucky that I was, 15, 16 at the time. And so I had a long career even sort of since then to kind of continue to learn and build and persevere through that. But I see it now, even, we have young sort of hot shots, I suppose, that have a great breakout year. And everyone, and I just think like, okay, now it's about like, how are you going to continue to stay hungry? Like, this isn't job done. We need, like, how do we keep that upper trajectory going so that your success on the domestic scale now gets projected onto the international scene, and you belong there as well. And that's something that I'm just sort of passionate about, and something that I've certainly experienced personally anyway.
You get to London in 2012 as part of this Olympic team. You're now part of that. What you said before, if you make the Olympics, you're one of the best divers in the world. So you're there, you're qualified as one of those people. What were the differences like from your Olympic experience to that Com Games experience in Delhi? Was there a really marked change and shift in terms of competition and what was going on around you at the time?
Yeah, certainly. Well, obviously at the Commonwealth Games, you've got a lesser number of countries that are competing. And so as a result of that, you're sort of a bit more familiar. It's a smaller pool. I think you touched on, finishing 9th in the platform. I think even in the prelim, there was probably only as many as sort of 16 or so, diving in that event. And so all of a sudden I get to the Olympics, and there was a couple of competitions in between, of course, but I get to the Olympics, and I remember the way that the country sort of qualifies spots, there's basically, 34, I think, typically, or 30 to 34 competitors. And normally, I remember the day before my competition, I remember sort of, again, I've never done this before, but I looked at this start list, and I wanted to sort of know what number I was diving and who I was after and whatever. And normally, as a young kid, normally I'm looking at these names, I'm thinking like, oh, I hope I'm not after this person, because that person's really good. And if he does really well, then it's me. Then the judges are going to, have seen this and whatever. And I remember just going through these names, and just every single name I read were great divers. Like, they were divers that you talk about, or that you study, or you watch their film. And it's exactly. So it really, I suppose, confirmed my sort of beliefs around the games. But essentially, I remember that day, my plan was in the next, in the prelim, I wanted to finish in the top 18 to be able to dive and progress to the semi-final. I thought that was roughly about where I sort of sat. And it meant that I was pretty much ahead of half the field. But as I sat there in that start list, I remember thinking like, well, let me just like have a look, and I'll circle some names as to like who I think roughly, I can get the best of on this one day or whatever. And who I think is probably going to find themselves in that top 18, ahead of me. And so I'm circling these guys that I think are, I can't beat him, he's incredible. He's, Olympic champion, whatever. And I'm circling all these names, and I've circled 24, not including myself. And I'm thinking like, and then I'm looking at, the other sort of 10 blokes, and I'm thinking like, yeah, you're also great. This isn't about kind of like, I'm just automatically going to be there. This is just an understanding of like, wow, like there are no, there's no people making up numbers. If anyone, it was probably me, there's no one making up numbers in this event. And this is going to be sort of a really sort of, difficult diving battle essentially, with truly the best of the best. And that was the beauty of it. That just meant that I was like, all right, well, I'm going to sleep, and tomorrow I'm just rolling the dice. I'm giving it everything I've got. I'm going to just focus on my 6 dives. And then at the end of that competition, I'm looking up at the scoreboard, and I'll let it tell me where I finished. So as far as that sort of perception of being the best of the best, that was absolutely confirmed, 2 months later, especially in diving, when I was stacking up myself against other names.
What are your memories of the actual competition in 2012? Obviously, you're standing up there on the platform. You've got thousands of people cheering and supporting. Is it like any other competition you'd been in at that stage? And just how much of a step up did it feel in terms of that specific environment?
Absolutely. No, I've never had anything like that since. And I'd certainly never had anything like that before. Not to sort of, I suppose, give away endings, but being back in the Olympic experience in Rio, for example, was just complete different scenarios with respect to the environment, with respect to the crowd and that sort of stuff. And I think part of that, of course, is a home Olympics. A home Olympics for the GB team. I'm diving men's 10 meter. You're probably familiar with the name Tom Daley. He was he finaled in Beijing as a young boy. And then here he is as this, medal chance, but also basically teen heartthrob. So it was I remember it was just loud. It was so loud in there. And they're not cheering for me, but I was certainly the beneficiary of all these people that had basically come to watch Tom dive. And so, yeah, there was barely a spare seat in the entire wings of this pool that they'd filled. My mum and dad were sitting somewhere, all the way to the other end of the 50-meter swimming pool, saying it was the best seats they could find. And it was just, like I said, it was just like nothing else. So that obviously, then you combine that with the Olympic Games, you combine it with the bright lights that come with that, the commentary, the cameras left, right, and center. You're worried, you're getting out of the pool and you've got someone chasing you. You've never had that before, with their camera and that sort of stuff. So certainly the diving aspect was probably the one constant. What I could actually do in my own dives and sort of in my own headspace, and that routine was probably the only constant. Everything else was just so surreal. And that, I think, is what brings out, that's sort of what means that, when you count those guys, or you count all the names and you think on paper, where should I stack up? But then you get into an environment like that and it doesn't mean anything. It's just about who can perform right now and who can, all of a sudden your name doesn't, your past experiences or your past competitions don't mean much when you're then all of a sudden all find yourself in that kind of cauldron. And it's just about sort of who can sort of manage it best, I suppose.
You come 20th, I think it was, in London. I mean, considering you said you'd circled 24 names, that means at least 4 you got the better of. But how do you look back on that performance in London, especially if you're still a teenager at that stage, I think, as well? Again, my maths might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure you are. How do you look back on that performance, and do you think that was really a defining moment, I guess, of your career, from just being able to say, I've competed with the world's best at the Olympics?
Yeah, for sure. And it's sort of, some part of it sort of stems from a similar sort of experience to what I had at the Commonwealth Games, in the sense of you got a better idea of what you're sort of expecting now, and you've managed it the best that you can in that environment and at that time. Coming 20th at the Games, for me as a young kid, I remember thinking I think probably every athlete, any athlete that goes to the Olympics or goes to the national championships, that goes to any competition, probably comes out away from the event thinking here are all the things that I could have done better, or if I had my time again, all that sort of stuff. But for me, I remember being pretty happy in that moment. I remember thinking that, I was optimistic that I was going to find myself in that top 18. You're right, as far as the number of people, those 24 blokes or whatever that I did circle. I certainly got beaten by ones that I didn't circle, and I managed to beat ones that I did circle. You know what I mean? That's just what I mean, the way that it works on the actual day. But for me, I think it probably the blessing in disguise of that experience. I finished 20th. I was the second reserve for the semi-final, which meant I had to get up in the morning and sort of at least be at the pool just in case there were some injuries or what have you. But honestly, I think the blessing in disguise was, as a young kid, to have had that experience at the Games competing myself, but then to be able to have essentially the best seat in the house, sitting with the other athletes, to watch that event transpire, to watch that semi-final happen, and then to watch that final. Because David Badaya David Badaya, the American 10-meter platform diver, and Tom Daley both finished very low in that prelim event at the Games. I'm not sure exactly the actual placings, but in my mind, I think it was sort of super close, even going to that last round. But these guys are next level, and I'm just sort of there trying to make that top 18, and they're trying to sort of get in there because there's that matter of urgency and expectation on them. And both those guys ended up finding themselves on the podium in the final. Two rounds later, I suppose, to the semi-final and then the final. So to me, like I said, to just be able to watch that, I was pretty content with kind of where I stacked up, and that my training reflected, my competition level reflected sort of where I was at with my training. But like I said, to have the best seat in the house, to watch the best of the best go head to head in the event that I envisioned was going to be what I would continue to sort of focus on moving forward through my career. That was incredibly rewarding. And I learned a lot even just through that. So I really enjoyed it.
Obviously, you kind of touched on, there was a lot of differences with Rio in 2016. lots of different competitions in between those 4 years, but I kind of want to fast forward to Rio and the Olympics there. And now that you're, I guess this is your second Olympics, you're no longer the teenager, the fresh-faced teenager making his Olympic debut. You've been part of the Australian diving team for a while. Did you take on more of a kind of a leadership role within that team as a result of that? And how different was that experience of being able to say, oh yeah, I've done this before. I'm Olympian. I know what this is about now.
Yeah, well, I certainly wasn't resting on my laurels in the sense of, this is, whatever, water off a duck's back. I've been here before, been there, done that. To me, to get back to Rio was that in itself was, obviously for 4 years, that was basically the end goal for ever since London. I had these things, about my Olympic experience that I wanted to sort of improve upon, or that I wanted to embrace more, or, just experience again. And I was really hungry for that. But you're right, exactly. So by the time Rio had rolled around, the diving team at that point didn't have sort of captains or sort of a leadership sort of circle at the time. But I was, I suppose, one of the most experienced with respect to Olympic experience. Again, I was about 21 years old, and and I suppose like still, getting my feet wet with respect to kind of as I look back now. But at the time, I absolutely felt well and truly, I suppose, I felt well and truly in place. I suppose I felt comfortable in that space of the Olympic Games. And I felt ready and hungry to compete. Whereas before, the first time, like I said, I was kind of getting there thinking like, oh, what's this like? Or wow, that's a bright light, or that's a big camera network, or that's a, whatever, or like, can I walk that? Whereas then in my second experience, it was way more like I had a better idea of what to expect. I had a better idea of how best to lead those going into their first Olympics, and to sort of help them out as well. And I had a better idea of kind of, how to prepare, and what was, I had a better idea of self, I suppose, what was going to allow me to achieve better, because I had an extra 4 more years of competing at this high level, at this international standard. And I was excited to see where I would stack up again the second time around.
Did you have a list for that Olympics as well, where you circled names and you thought, oh, who can I get on top of?
That's the good thing. Yeah, right. Like you said, so there are certainly things I learned, and then there's things I learned to do better next time, and things I certainly learned not to do. Because again, by that stage, you're diving, I said, at the Olympic Games. There are no poor divers, or there's no sort of gimmies. You're all there on a very sort of level playing field. There's still guys at the very top that you're gonna have to have your best day and then their worst to sort of really edge them, anywhere, to give them any sort of run for their money. But at the same time, so for me, it was a much more mature head, less about outcome, less about sort of this is what I want to achieve, or this is kind of where I want to be placed, and more just about like let my diving do the talking. And again, we'll see sort of where we stack up.
I guess we've obviously kind of touched on the fact that the Olympics are kind of the pinnacle, I guess, of the sport, that they come around every 4 years. And especially when you get to compete at them, there's something about it that makes you perform on a different level. But in 2018, the Com Games, I guess, comes to home soil. And we'll get into kind of your results from that in a moment. But the fact that, you're competing in this massive world event on home soil, does that lift it up a little bit and bring the importance up to you?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The Commonwealth Games to me presented more than anything the closest thing to a home Olympics that I will ever get to experience. And so as soon as the Commonwealth Games were given or delegated, I suppose, to the Gold Coast, I knew for sure that I wanted to be there. Obviously, the Olympics 2 years beforehand everything was about those games, but certainly those Commonwealth Games were a priority of mine because of exactly that. It was not only just an opportunity to have this big event on our home soil and be the home team and really relish in that opportunity, but it was a great opportunity to grow our sport. If the diving team could perform well, I truly believe that was going to put us in a great position, I suppose, to grow our sport in Australia and domestically, because all of a sudden people weren't, like for example, in London or in Rio, I remember getting messages after my events from friends or family that were, rugged up in blankets at 3 a.m. watching my diving on the TV, because it was live at that time. Whereas now all of a sudden it was prime time, and it was, and the stands were full. And normally at our national championships, we can't get, 10 mums to come and watch their kids, whereas at this event, it was packed. We had people from all over the country that had flown to the Gold Coast to support us as the diving team. Not to mention, that we knew from the diving community, but then not to mention just the rest of the public, I suppose, that were interested in. And to me, that was amazing. So without being the teenage heartthrob, I got the same sort of cheers that Tom Daley had at the at the Olympics in 2012. All of a sudden, I came out of the water, and it was, it was loud, and it was reverberating sort of all around us off the platforms and everything. And I remember just being like, yeah, that was amazing, an amazing experience.
That was a pretty incredible place to dive as well, that sort of outdoor venue there up on the Gold Coast. I mean, clearly it worked in your favour. What was it? A silver in the 1 metre, and then the 2 bronzes in the synchro and the 3 metre. What was it like? Which event came first? Which one was the first one that you got the medal in?
So yeah, you're right. I had the silver medal in the men's 1 metre, and then the bronze medal in the individual 3 metre. And then we did have an Australian team that did very well in the synchro as well, but unfortunately that was not, I wasn't sort of in there. So I'll give credit where credit's due to those other blokes. But for me, the 1 metre was the first, 1 metre was my first event, that silver medal. And that was, so you're right, diving outdoors, it always comes with its own sort of, I suppose, difficulties that you don't necessarily have to deal with when you're indoors, whether it's the wind or the sun or the rain or whatever it might be. And for that, of course, whether it was for TV or otherwise, or just scheduling, our prelims were during the day when the sun was right above us, and the Gold Coast sky, there's not a cloud in there. It's just blue the whole way around between the water and the sky and everything. And so it was very, very difficult. But then the finals were at nighttime. And that's obviously, not only do we not spend too much time diving outdoors, we certainly don't spend too much time diving outdoors at night. So there was all these sort of complications. And again, you're in a big event. It's just a bit, you have no idea how this is all going to go. And so that 1 metre event was my first event of the games. And it was just, it really couldn't have gone better. That silver medal was something I was super, super proud of. We'd had some sort of tough training days, getting used to the outdoor conditions and that sort of stuff. But that 1 metre final sort of all really came together. And I was super, super happy with how that sort of all eventuated.
Who was there for you in that moment? Imagine lots of family and friends that had got up to the Gold Coast to be there with you for those games.
Yeah, so you're right, family. So I come from a pretty big family. I have 4 sisters, and then mum and dad, obviously. And we're originally from Melbourne, but in the lead up to 2012, I spent time up in Brisbane for about 4 years. I graduated from high school up here, and it was where I was training at the AIS in the preparation for the 2012 games. So Brisbane, even, and I suppose by extension of that, the Gold Coast, was a bit of a second home for me anyway, even if it's not my actual hometown. It's somewhere where I was very comfortable and spent a lot of time. So I had some friends from high school and stuff that were, either watching or around, or, people were volunteering, that sort of stuff as well, and being a part of the community. But my family, my family, with the exception of my youngest sister, were all up in the crowd, and they were all sort of there for me, which was super, super exciting. And then it wasn't, and so to be able to share that with them was amazing. As soon as the event was over, I found them, I went straight for them, that stuff. And what I didn't appreciate was that my sister, my younger sister Jess, she was boarding the flight from Melbourne to the Gold Coast, or to Brisbane, I should say. And it was in the last round of the final. So she said she's waiting at the gate, and they're saying last call for Brisbane. And she's there refreshing this like Gold Coast 2018 app just to see where and she says she got on the plane, still unable, like it still wasn't loading, or my dive, whatever. She said the 2-hour flight from Melbourne to the Brisbane was the worst anxiety she's ever experienced. And she's just refreshing. She had to stay for that exam. Anyway, of course, then it's the super happy emotion when she lands and she can check and it all went well and that sort of stuff. So that was amazing. But then backing up the 3 metre, that was, and all of a sudden my whole family's there. And my 3 best friends from Melbourne had flown up as well. They were there in the stand. So when we talk about pressure to back up, that was certainly the case. Not from them, all just internally placed on myself. But I thought if I had this great result, 24 hours earlier, I think it was literally the day before. I now want to make sure that I can back this up with my family and my friends in the crowd, so that I can really share that with them, because it was so special that they took time, whether out of their jobs or out of their work or out of their school, to be there, and to share that with them was the highlight of my career.
Obviously now, I guess the momentum towards Tokyo has slowed down a bit from last year anyway, because it was postponed. It was kind of the COVID-19 started, everyone was like, oh no, we'll be fine, we'll be going ahead. And suddenly they went, no, we can't go ahead. Where were you when you found out that Tokyo 2020 was going to be pushed back to Tokyo 2021?
So I was up in Brisbane, I suppose. The writing was certainly well and truly on the wall. In Melbourne, we were losing access to the pool. I'd heard that. I remember every day I was making these, I suppose, contingency plans for like, if I lose access to this pool, this is where I'll go, or I'll make sure that I'm able to train here, or I'll be able to do my gym at this place if this gym shuts and stuff. And every day, new information would come to light, and that contingency would be completely nullified, and I'd be there at the, writing it out sort of all over again. So what ended up happening is the coach up here in Queensland, I remember calling him and I just said, like, Coach, I'm struggling at the moment. I'm sort of playing team manager, athlete, and, basically coach at the moment. I'm trying to work this out and it's just tough. And he literally just said, he's like, just get up here, come up to Brisbane, come train here. Basically we'll take you and we'll look after you, and you can just, we'll just keep on keeping on up here. And the reason why that was a great move for me at the time was because Brisbane, in the way that the pool sort of operates, I figured it would be the last one to shut, if that was the case. If all the pools around the country were shutting diving wise, Brisbane would probably be the last one standing before they would then shut as well. So it was, one weekend in March. I flew up on the Saturday because I wanted to make sure that no borders shut before I got on the plane. So I literally booked a flight the next day, got up to Brisbane. And then that next day, literally 24 hours, Sunday night, was Scott Morrison on the TV saying that we're going into lockdown, all gyms, indoor facilities, all that stuff's closing. And I remember thinking, all right, I booked a flight the next morning. So I came all the way up to Brisbane to train in this, what I thought was going to be this like safe haven, not to have a single session, and to fly back down to Melbourne the next day and go straight back into lockdown. And it was at that point that I remember saying, like, okay, like this is now not only is the Olympics sort of unlikely looking globally, but we're also in a position, not just the diving team, but obviously nationwide, that we need to start talking about postponing the games and about trying to sort of, talk to the IOC and stuff about doing it. And in the end, that decision was made for us anyway. So I remember being at home when that decision was made. It all came through. And at the time, I remember, I suppose it was deflating because, that's kind of what you're planning for, but and then when it sort of gets postponed or extended like that, you sort of start to question, like, well, now what am I doing next year? Do I keep diving? Do I keep whatever? But I would also say that in that moment, I remember just thinking, right call. That is like, with where the world was at, it would just have been so head in the sand, sort of ignorant, I suppose, or negligent even in some cases, to try and get everyone over to there from all corners of the globe. I remember saying to someone, I was like, if I was COVID, I would be licking my lips at the thought, at the prospect of everyone from all over the world congregating in
100%
one village, only to then, spend 2 weeks there and then And I just thought, I was like, so in the end, it just became, I remember being sort of pretty okay with that decision, because in the global scheme of things, it just seemed right. And regardless of how that sort of did, what that did to my personal timeline or my diving or any sort of plans that I had in place or whatever, I just thought that was appropriate. And then it was just sort of time to reassess and work out where to next for me, or what to from there.
I imagine the Australian diving team and the coaches, you'd have like a message group, a WhatsApp group, whatever it is. Did you find that the response to the decision to postpone Tokyo, after you've been a 2-time Olympian now, so you kind of know what it's about, but how did those guys and girls who haven't been to Olympics or haven't had that experience, how did they take it? Were they potentially a little bit more concerned about the decision?
I think, like I said, generally speaking, given the nature of what we were talking about, I think everyone sort of, like I said, understood, and as upsetting as that sort of thing would be in an ideal world, in the context of what was going on, I think everyone was pretty okay, relatively speaking, sort of with the decision and with where it sort of left us. Of course, everyone had their own individual circumstances. Like I remember, when I spent some time in America, over there for college, and meeting these people that were on the team for the Olympics when the US boycotted. And I remember thinking, like, in that moment, being like, sort of, feeling so sorry for them, having been an Olympian, having experienced what that would have been like, and knowing the sacrifice and the dedication that goes into even being a part of that conversation every 4 years. The Olympics being every 4 years for an athlete, you may only have sort of, maybe you only have 4 or 8 years sort of at the top of your game, depending on how long you can stay injury free, depending on how good the rest of the competition is, all that sort of stuff. So for your level, I suppose for your performances to be sort of at that level at the same time as an Olympics rolls around every 4 years is super difficult to do even once. And there is no guarantee that it happens again. So for me, I felt when this Olympics was postponed, there were people in all different circumstances. There was me that had been to 2, that was hoping for a best performance, and a final performance in Tokyo sort of was all they were training for, and everything else was kind of put on hold. There were people that had transition plans set up for afterwards that they were now having to reassess as to whether they would continue diving or continue doing sport and going ahead. And there were people that were, when I talk about like hot shots and talk about people that were really sort of, really coming onto the scene, that were probably going to peak, or I shouldn't say peak, they were probably going to, still maintain that level right up to the Olympic trials that were going to be in that place. And so all of a sudden now you're thinking like, can I maintain that for another year? Can I sort of continue this sort of, this run going? Can I continue being injury free? So it shifts the goalposts for sure as far as everyone's preparation is concerned. And I don't think there was anyone that was, there's no athlete that was unaffected by it, because and then it extends, there's also people that were sort of felt like they were holding on and maybe they couldn't go another 12 months. And there were young kids that probably thought 12 more months is all I need, all of a sudden now I'm going to be a part of the conversation, as I said, at that trial event. So it was a completely sort of mixed bag of emotions. But I think the underlying, when you sort of, from an objective standpoint, when you remove the personal circumstance, I think everyone sort of was pretty level-headed about it, and understood that regardless of what you might like, or regardless of what you would plan or hope for yourself, it just wasn't to be, and it wasn't the right time for the world to come together for an event of that scale. And so, yeah, I think we were all pretty lent on each other for sure, but also just took some time to kind of, redirect ourselves and work out where to next.
What did 2020 look like for you instead? Like, obviously with lots of pools and diving facilities shut, you would have had to kind of change tack. Did you just take a bit of time off from diving? And it probably would have been the longest you'd gone without diving for a long time, I guess, in your career.
Yeah, you're right. Well, I was in Melbourne actually for, like I said, so I'd flown back to Melbourne for the lockdown. And then of course, like, we come out of the national lockdown only for, a month or so before Melbourne gets hit with the second wave that really sort of turned the whole city on its head, I suppose. So you're right. For me, it was very much, it was a lot of time at home, which is unusual for me. Normally I'm super busy because I'm going from training before this interview, coming back from the pool, and everything's kind of on a tight schedule because you've got to go back for training, got to eat sometime in the middle, all that sort of stuff. All of a sudden, now I've got time and I'm just calm. Like, I'm doing some gym workouts at home, and I'm doing the best I can sort of to keep fit and sort of energized. But as far as like the ability to dive headfirst into water and jump on the springboards and things like that, or the trampolines, that sort of thing, that's stuff that only happens externally of your home environment. So it was very much a 2020 to me, what it became, I suppose, was much more time at home, much more time with family then. And like I said, I've been in America for a long time. So that was lovely to sort of be a part of that sort of not community, but essentially that sort of nucleus again in the family home. And so it was super rewarding for me. But it was basically a lot of time at home, a lot of time just trying to do some sort of sit-ups in my lounge rooms and convince myself that was like a good enough gym setup for what I, for right now and for where I was at. And there was no urgency to be back in the water just yet. It was probably great for my body, gave it a bit of a chance to sort of recover and rest and get ready for another full-blown year that we've had. And I guess, also an opportunity to grow my hair longer, which was something that I'd never done. And every day I dive now, I think I have to get a haircut. But that's probably the most physical difference or observable difference that happened in that 2020 year that would certainly not have happened otherwise. So, we'll see. I don't think that's a blessing in disguise at all. I don't think that's just unfortunate laziness and the salons being closed. But we'll see. I've kept with it for this long anyway, and maybe we'll keep going.
So we won't be seeing that beard and hair in Tokyo, is what you're alluding at there?
Yeah, I'm not sure. To be honest, I figured I'm going to be clean shaven when the time real comes. It's professional cut, clean shaven, short sides, all that sort of stuff. And then it was at Christmas where up here in Queensland, some of the boys that we had a bit of a kind of I sort of turned it into a Lost Boys type Christmas, where it was guys that sort of couldn't go home or whatever for different reasons with travel restrictions, whatever. They're sort of congregated here in Brisbane, and we just sort of spent the day sort of as a group of mates. And they were it was their idea that said, keep it, and if you make the games, shave it into a mullet. And I said no, and they said, if you do that, imagine we talk about the Gold Coast being an opportunity to put diving on the map. They said, if we have an Aussie Olympian rocking a mullet diving at the level that you dive, they're saying like, it is just a media frenzy. They're saying like people would go wild. And we entertained the idea for about the 25 minutes that conversation lasted. But certainly, I think absolutely. Hopefully, I'll be pretty unrecognizable if the Olympics go ahead and I'm fortunate enough to be in Japan, and we catch up over there. I'm hopeful you won't recognize me, because I'll be looking much better than what I currently do. That's for sure.
Look, I like the idea of a mullet. I think considering how much Aussie media goes nuts for a mullet, if there's an athlete wearing one and sporting one in an event, I mean, you'd certainly get the cameras on you. That is for sure.
I think you're right. So yeah, food for thought, and we'll see.
I guess, how do you feel about everything happening with Tokyo at the moment? Do you still feel confident about everything going over there? I mean, we found out this week in the playbook about there won't be cheering or chanting, that crowds can clap, but there's not much else.
Yeah, look, it's, when I talk about the previous two Olympics that I've been fortunate enough to represent Australia at and participate in myself, and how one experience in London then set me up for a great experience in Rio, knowing what to expect. I think realistically, a lot of those things won't exist in the same way or capacity that they did when we go to Tokyo, should that eventuate. Personally, I think at the moment, the way I'm training is just a matter of I'm not really giving any sort of thought to the fact that it may not go ahead. I think for me personally, that's just been a huge motivating factor, I suppose, to just focus on what for lack of a better word, it's a bit cliche these days, but essentially to focus on what I can control, and that's just diving, getting better, and being ready should that opportunity come. We know that an Olympics, if it eventuates, and I probably shouldn't keep saying if it eventuates, but we know that the Olympics will look very, very different in Japan this year than what they have in previous years, should the games continue or should go ahead. And I think for me, that's okay. There's just sort of concessions that are going to be made. And again, it's in the global context of where the world's at. I think realistically, in my heart of hearts, with what we're seeing in some other multi-sport or other sort of sporting events going ahead, I think it's possible. I think there's enough weight on both sides to suggest that either maybe it should or maybe it will or maybe it won't. And so for me, like I said, to cut that out and to really just focus on my diving, I alluded to it before, making Olympic Games is so hard any year. So even if the games go ahead and we have a trials, there's going to be a lot of work to do to even sort of have a ticket on that plane for myself. So for me, all it is about putting myself in the best position should that opportunity become available, such that I'll be ready, or like I said, be in the best position possible that I can be to take that opportunity and grab it with both hands. Because I just think, the opportunity to have the best of the best in that one pool on that one day diving against each other is, to me, what the Olympics is all about. Sharing it with the fans and having them cheering and having the spectators and the village atmosphere and all that sort of stuff is lovely. And it's what makes the Olympics I suppose, the spectacle in many respects that it is. But to me, with the way the handbook sort of presented itself in the focus being really just getting the athletes in, have that competition, and then sort of, have them disperse or whatever, to me, I think would also suit me just fine. I think that's the crux of the games as far as from an athlete's perspective or from my own perspective. And so to have that opportunity would be amazing. And we'll just have to sort of, like I said, keep working hard to make sure it's feasible for that to be me in that situation, if Australia has a team over there representing us.
I want you to get me to answer me a couple of questions for anyone out there who might not quite understand diving, because it's quite a complicated sport, I guess, at the end of the day. First off, how long did it take you to understand the scoring system? Do you understand it, or do you just see the number up there and go, oh, okay, that seems about right?
It definitely takes some time. I remember as a young kid, you get these low scores thinking you'd done the best dive that their judges would ever have seen in their life. And you come out and getting sort of 4.5 5s. And you think, oh, one of us is wrong. And I have a pretty good feeling as to how that was. So it definitely took some time. But the biggest things, especially if you're watching diving for the first time, is really just how little splash there is. That's the big one. But then also, I suppose, how high you jump, and how nice and how essentially how pretty it looks in the air. And so when the judges have a sliding scale from 0 to 10 to sort of place you somewhere, then that's for them to sort of work out, and they're just got to be consistent across the whole board. But essentially, if you're jumping high, you look pretty, and you make little splash, that's probably why the haircut's going to be important. You should find yourself in pretty good space if you can do that all 6 times of your competition.
I'd argue a mullet flying through the hair would add to the looking good during the dive.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think you're probably right. Exactly. Especially there's a few Aussie judges on that panel, I reckon.
Definitely. The other question, I guess, is the technical aspects of the dive. Obviously, difficulty can be different for each dive that you do and each dive that you attempt. When you go into a competition, how set are you on, okay, these are the 6 dives I'm going to do? Or is it you see other people do a dive and go, oh, shit, I've got to do a different dive if I want any chance of trying to get up this scoreboard or this leaderboard?
Yeah, well, you're right. It's a bit of a strategic decision often, because obviously the lower DD you do, the lower the degree of difficulty of the dive, the more likely you probably are typically to do it well. It's an easier skill and there's less difficulty in it. So, but then obviously the judges' score might be higher, but you only get the lower multiplier by the lower DD. So it's certainly strategy. It's about kind of making sure that whatever you end up doing, it's going to be what puts the most points on the board at the end of your 6 rounds. So for me at the moment, and typically you do dial in on what your 6 dives are going to be. You basically spend the months leading up to the games just training those specific dives, and then you just hope that they perform as well as they can, because you have by that stage a pretty good idea as to best case scenario, this is where I'll be. And when you look at the world class sort of divers, where does that sort of rough score kind of put me? Is it in part of the conversation? Do I need to find a way to get more points in there? And that's when you start looking at different DDs or different sort of combinations of dives or whatever it might be. But certainly, my advice to any sort of young divers is you never sort of give up quality. The bigger DD has a more mathematical chance, but if it's not in reality that is going to give you more actual points at the end, don't let your ego, I suppose, get in the way of good diving.
What gets you up in the morning and motivates you to get up for those early morning trainings? I mean, I've spoken to a lot of athletes, and it's about the competitions, it's about certain aspects. But for you, what is it? Because I know diving, and the same with swimming, I guess, it's so many early mornings. And I bet especially when it gets to winter, it's just the last thing you want to do is get out of bed at 5 a.m. to go and train.
Yeah. What gets me out of bed in the morning for sure to go to training is just this gratitude, I suppose, that I have an opportunity right now to really just get better in something, in the sense that I think in diving, when I view it, I think objectively speaking, a lot of the the top level athletes in Australia, you're, within the top 10, top 15 of the world at what you do. And the fact that you have something that you are so committed to, that you can see noticeable improvements every day, and you have that drive to not perfection, but literally just to doing anything, I suppose, that you're capable of to the best of your ability. So for me, what gets me out of bed is that hunger, I suppose, to be better today than what I was yesterday. And I'm lucky in some capacities, because I think sport provides that in a way that jobs and life experiences don't give you that same immediate, I suppose, assessment of that progress. For example, in diving, it's pretty easy. You're either back sore because you landed flat on the water, or you're feeling pretty good because you're getting some claps on the side of the pool because it was good. So I think for me, it's just that opportunity to get better, and not knowing, I suppose, how you're going to be going to bed that night, and how much better you did get. So I think for me, it's just that hunger and gratitude, I suppose.
The last question I ask everyone when I finish off these podcasts, it's designed to kind of get you thinking holistically about your career, I guess. What are you most proud of in your career to date?
Well,
it might be a medal, it might be making a team, or it might be something outside of the sport, I guess, that you're proud that you've been able to say, I've achieved something that I wanted to do when I was younger. It could be anything, I guess.
Yeah. I think for me, to think of what I'm most proud of or highlights of my career, my mind does go back to the Gold Coast Com Games, and it has nothing. Well, I shouldn't say it has nothing, but it is a disconnect between the performance in that event and why it's so special to me. Because, for example, for me, it's that 3-meter individual competition where I got the bronze medal. It was about the fact that from my whole career, I suppose, whether it was moving up to Brisbane or it was moving over to America or what have you, my family has invested just as much in my career as I have. I've been there. I've been the one sort of at the early mornings, or on the platform, under the bright lights, whatever it might be. But that has only been made possible because of support that my family, both my sisters, or all my sisters and my parents as well, have sort of invested in me. So for me, and allowed me to sort of achieve to that level. So for me, the reason that Commonwealth Games is so special to me and why I'm so proud is because it gave something tangible for me to share with my family in real time. It gave a performance that we could look at and say that they were there for, they were in the stands for all together, because that doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. If the competition's in China or it's in Russia or it's in America, there's no chance that I'm getting all 4 of my sisters and my mum and dad over there at the same time. It's just not feasible with schedules and that sort of stuff. But they were able to be there and I was able to perform and we were able to then enjoy that together. And I just think that moment is by far the most special to me. And it, like I said, it's separate to the fact that it was a medal winning performance. It was just the fact that we had something that we could celebrate as a family and really look at and say, we did that, and it wasn't just about mom and dad, this is how it went, or I'm so happy this is what the result was. It was, we were all there. We all got to experience it. We all had that elation, and seeing what it meant to them was deeply, deeply humbling and satisfying for me as well. So proudest achievement, proudest moment of my career. Certainly that day on the Gold Coast when my whole family got to experience that success with me.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to wrap up, especially the importance of family. So many athletes have that story of how important and what a role their family have played. And I think it's pretty clear you do too. And I'm sure they'll continue to play that role. Hopefully this year, as you get closer to hopefully being over in Tokyo for the Olympics. James, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I really appreciate it.
Lachlan, I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much for your time and for your interest in diving.